I went downstairs Christmas morning with her gift. Found my fiancée on a blanket with a man in front of the fireplace. She said, Santa came early, so I put her gift in the flames then. I used to think Christmas morning had a rhythm you could trust. The house woke up slowly. The cold settled against the windows. Someone made coffee. Someone unwrapped something thoughtful. Someone pretended they loved it even if they didn't. I always believed that rhythm meant safety. I believed that if two people shared that morning tradition, they were pointed in the same direction. This year, I decided to raise the stakes a little. I made a sort of private bet with myself. I spent 3 weeks building a gift for my fiancée, Lena. A handcrafted memory box with small compartments, each holding something meaningful from different moments in our relationship. A movie ticket from our first date. A keychain from the county fair where we got stuck at the top of the Ferris wheel. A seashell she pocketed from a beach trip because she said it reminded her of something she couldn't explain. I wanted that box to be more than a gift. I wanted it to be the proof that she still looked at me the way she used to. The bet was simple. If she opened it and her face softened, if she showed even a flicker of the warmth we used to share, I would propose in 2 weeks, just after New Year's. If she reacted with distance or forced politeness, I would take that as the universe nudging me to reconsider everything. I didn't tell her the bet existed. It wasn't a game for her. It was something I needed for myself. I woke up early that morning with the box under my arm, the wrapping neat but not too perfect, because she once said perfect wrapping made her nervous to tear it open. The house was quiet except for the crackling sound from downstairs. I thought she must have woken up early to start a fire. She liked cozy touches. She liked to curate the mood. I walked down the stairs slowly, expecting to see her curled under a blanket with coffee, maybe searching for holiday playlists. Instead, I froze halfway down when the shapes near the fireplace formed into something else. Lena was on a thick blanket on the floor with a man I had never seen up close. Their clothes were scattered across the rug in a trail that told the whole story before they even noticed me standing there. The fire lit their silhouettes in a way that felt surreal. If I had been watching a movie, I might have thought the director had gone too far with the lighting. The man jumped when he saw me, but Lena didn't. She lifted her head lazily, looked right at me, and delivered the line that became permanently etched into the inside of my skull. She said Santa had come early. The words didn't come out with shame or panic. They came out with a tone so smug it made my palms turn cold. I don't remember dropping my gift into the fire as a decision. My hand simply opened. The box slipped in. The flames closed around it like they had been waiting. There was the sound of the wrapping crackling and the memory box popping as the glue heated. The fire didn't hesitate. It ate every piece immediately. Lena didn't move to stop me. She didn't even sit up fully. She turned her head toward the man as if she expected him to say something clever to match the moment. He didn't. He scrambled so fast he tripped over the corner of the blanket. He grabbed his shirt, shoved his legs into the wrong pant leg twice, and ran toward the back door so clumsily that he smacked his shoulder into the wall before disappearing into the snow outside. Lena watched him leave with a faint smile, almost amused by his panic. Then she looked back at me. I could see in her expression that she had rehearsed this moment in her mind, but not the version where I stayed silent. She expected shouting. She expected rage. She expected a scene that she could later retell with herself as the victim of my overreaction. Instead, I just stood there watching the fire swallow the last thing I had built for her. She started talking, explaining that the man wasn't random and that this wasn't the first time. She said it all in a tone that felt disconnected from reality, like she was reviewing a casual mistake instead of detonating something foundational. She mentioned that the man liked fireplaces, which was apparently why their early morning tradition had developed. That detail should have made me furious, but oddly it grounded me. It made everything practical. It made the betrayal feel less mystical and more mundane. I asked her one question, not in a dramatic way, but because I needed a real anchor in that moment. I asked how long this had been happening. She told me weeks. Weeks, while I was upstairs sleeping. Weeks, while I imagined a proposal. Weeks, while I crafted a box filled with pieces of our shared life. Her tone didn't waver. She spoke like she was proud of the efficiency of her secret schedule. That was the moment I realized she had detached from us entirely long before Christmas morning. She wasn't confessing. She was revealing a fact she assumed I would eventually accept because she was honest now. I didn't trust myself to keep standing in that room without doing something I'd regret, so I walked outside. The cold hit my face so hard it felt like the air itself didn't want me near that house anymore. I saw footprints leading from the back door through the snow toward the street. They were spaced far apart because the man had been running. He had run past my neighbor's house, and I saw curtains move. Someone had seen him. That detail should have added embarrassment, but instead it added clarity. Truth had already spilled into the world. I didn't need to control the narrative. Reality would take its own shape. Lena called after me from the doorway. Her voice edged not with remorse, but irritation. She complained that I had ruined the morning ambience and that the fire was getting too hot for the room. She actually criticized the fire. I stared at her without speaking, and that silence seemed to bother her more than anything else. When I finally walked away from the house, she shouted something about me being dramatic. The word dramatic felt misplaced coming from the person who staged a Christmas morning fireplace affair. But I didn't correct her. I didn't say anything. I walked down the street until I couldn't see the house anymore. The cold didn't bite the way I expected. My body felt strangely steady, as if the shock had created its own insulation. I didn't feel heartbreak yet. It was too soon. My brain hadn't caught up. My life had just split into two pieces, and I hadn't picked which one to follow. I knew one thing, though. The moment I dropped that gift into the flames, something symbolic died ahead of schedule. Not the relationship. That had died long before without my knowledge. What burned was the last version of me that believed this woman was worth building a life with. And as I walked, I sensed, without knowing how, that Christmas morning was not the peak of the chaos. It was only the first crack in the surface. Something deeper waited underneath, and I had just stepped into the part of the story where the ground gives way. I didn't know then how many people had seen things. I didn't know how many lies had been told behind my back. I didn't know that the man I saw would reappear in the days ahead in ways that would shift everything again. All I knew was that the tempo of my life had changed direction, and whatever came next would not be quiet. I walked for nearly an hour on Christmas morning without thinking about where I was going. I didn't take my phone. I didn't take my wallet. I didn't take anything except the shirt I had pulled on and the cold air that felt cleaner than anything inside that house. When I finally circled back toward the neighborhood, I expected quiet streets and empty porches. Instead, I saw a small cluster of neighbors outside, bundled in coats, standing in the snow like they were waiting for a bus that never came. They weren't chatting. They weren't walking dogs. They weren't doing anything except scanning the street, as if expecting someone to show up again. When they noticed me approaching, a few of them exchanged glances. Not pitying ones. Curious ones. I didn't love being the subject of attention, but Christmas morning apparently had other plans for me. Before I could slip past, Mrs. Patterson, the retired woman who lived 2 doors down, known for having binocular vision without owning actual binoculars, stepped right into my path. She asked if everything was all right, but the question was so gentle that it landed differently than the nosy tone I had expected. She placed a hand on my forearm in a way that suggested she already knew the answer. Then she said something that made my stomach tilt. She had seen a man sneaking out of our back door before sunrise twice earlier that week. She assumed it was a visiting relative or friend because Lena always acted friendly with her. Hearing that detail broke something loose in my understanding. Christmas morning wasn't an isolated accident. It wasn't a moment of weakness. It wasn't even a secret fling happening occasionally. This had been a routine, a schedule, a pattern happening while I slept on the floor above them, believing I shared my life with someone loyal. I thanked Mrs. Patterson, though the words felt hollow leaving my mouth, and returned to the house only long enough to grab my keys and jacket. Lena stood in the living room with her arms crossed, staring at the burned remains of the memory box as if the ashes had personally insulted her. She asked me if I planned to keep sulking all day, which almost made me laugh. The disbelief was too heavy to allow anger through yet. I told her I just came to grab a few things. She asked where I was going. I told her anywhere else. That answer offended her far more than anything she had done. She stepped in front of me and demanded to know when I planned to come back and talk like adults. The fact that she could refer to herself as one half of a responsible adult conversation nearly short-circuited my brain. I didn't want to engage, but she kept pushing. She wanted explanations, reasons, justifications for why I left the house so abruptly, as if the scene in front of the fireplace required clarification. I told her I had nothing to say until I understood the full truth. She scoffed, told me I was being dramatic again, and insisted the entire incident wasn't cheating. It was, according to her, a lapse and a stupid kind of fun that didn't need to be blown up into something serious. I stared at her long enough for the silence to work against her, which made her add a new layer of nonsense. She claimed the man, whose name she still hadn't mentioned, meant nothing to her. She said he was just someone who enjoyed admiration and physical affection, and she enjoyed giving it to him because it made her feel youthful. Youthful. That was the word that finally pushed me from stunned into something sharper. I told her I wasn't interested in being replaced by a mood booster, and she laughed, not from humor, but from disbelief that I was taking everything so literally. I didn't respond. I walked past her, grabbed my essentials, and left the house again. Her voice trailed behind me with complaints about how inconsiderate I was being on a holiday. Then she slammed the door hard enough to shake the wreath loose. I didn't expect the day to worsen, But by noon I learned that Lena had already contacted my sister. She didn't wait hours. She didn't wait minutes. She immediately began building her narrative. She told my sister that I had gone unhinged, burned a gift of sentimental value, and threatened to leave her stranded on Christmas. She painted herself as a confused, heartbroken partner who didn't know why I had snapped so violently. When my sister called me, her voice shook because she had heard only one version of the story, Lena's version. Fortunately, the truth wasn't something I needed to fabricate. It sat heavy in my chest and came out clean once I finally forced myself to say the words aloud. The silence on the other end of the call lasted long enough that I thought the connection dropped. Eventually, my sister apologized for assuming anything and said she would come over if I needed support. I told her I was fine, though I wasn't entirely sure what that word meant at that point. But the day wasn't done with me. Around late afternoon, I received messages from two acquaintances, not close friends, but people who had been present at local bars and gatherings where Lena and the mystery man had apparently enjoyed themselves publicly. They told me they hadn't known I was still with her because she behaved like someone unattached. She had called the man her partner. Not friend, not colleague, partner. They mentioned small details that made my skin crawl. She had introduced him to people she barely knew without hesitation, while she never wanted to introduce me to anyone during the last few months. That shift wasn't subtle. It was a punch I should have felt earlier, but didn't. Those messages brought the first true twist into sharp focus. The man from the fireplace wasn't a secret lover she protected carefully. He was someone she paraded around casually, confident I wouldn't find out because she assumed I was too trusting or too oblivious to question anything. It hit me that she wasn't just cheating. She was building a life parallel to mine, one where I existed as a spare part rather than a partner. The man wasn't a hidden pleasure. He was someone she wanted to be seen with. She had already created a public identity with him, while expecting me to remain her financial and emotional foundation until she decided otherwise. That realization hollowed out the last bit of stunned numbness I had been carrying since morning. When I confronted her again, yes, confrontation number 2 in a single day, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse her. I didn't demand anything. I simply stated what I learned. She didn't blink. She claimed everything was exaggerated or misinterpreted. She insisted she hadn't done anything to embarrass me, which was the only part she seemed remotely concerned about. Not the betrayal, not the disrespect, not the fact that she had been lying for weeks. Just the possibility that I felt embarrassed. She told me I was overreacting to things that didn't matter. Then she said something astonishing. If I couldn't handle a little attention from other people, maybe I wasn't mature enough for marriage. That sentence didn't feel like a mistake or a slip of the tongue. It felt like something she had practiced. I realized then that she expected this confrontation. She had pre-built excuses, justifications, and manipulative phrasing ready to deploy. She had been preparing for the moment her two lives collided. What she didn't expect was my refusal to erupt. She didn't know what to do with silence and calmness. Those were tools she couldn't weaponize. When I left the house the second time, the air felt even colder than the morning. But this time I didn't feel insulated by shock. I felt something sharper forming. Not anger, not revenge, but clarity. A type of clarity that changes the shape of a person's decisions. And I sensed the storm wasn't done. Christmas morning was merely the starting point. The people who had witnessed pieces of her deception were already awakening, and the story was beginning to ripple through the neighborhood, our families, her social circle, and places I didn't even know existed yet. I had no idea how much worse it would get. I didn't know that the man's identity would tie into a larger disaster. I didn't know how many lies had been constructed around me like scaffolding. I only knew the tempo had started rising, and I wasn't anywhere near the loudest part yet. By the next morning, the story of the half-dressed man sprinting through the snow behind my house had spread through the neighborhood like weather news. People talked about it quietly, not with mockery, but with that careful tone people use when they want to acknowledge something without seeming intrusive. I wasn't embarrassed. Strangely, their awareness made everything feel more grounded, less like a surreal nightmare and more like a series of events that had consequences outside my head. I checked into a short-term Airbnb on the other side of town. It wasn't fancy. It smelled faintly like old wood and lemon cleaner, and the heat rattled the vents whenever it kicked on, but it offered distance. I spent most of the morning sitting on the couch, trying to understand the shape of my life now. The shock had worn off, replaced by a slow-burning clarity that made every memory feel sharper than usual. I replayed moments from the past months. Lena coming home late, Lena scrolling through her phone with her screen tilted away, Lena calling me overly sensitive when I asked why she seemed more distracted lately. These weren't isolated quirks. They were breadcrumbs leading to a truth she had been living long before I discovered it. Around noon, the Airbnb host messaged me to say someone had stopped by the door asking if I was staying there. He didn't let them in, but he described her in detail. It was Lena. She had discovered my location less than 24 hours after I left. That didn't surprise me. She always had a way of inserting herself into problems quickly, especially when she feared losing control. Within 10 minutes, she started calling. The first call I ignored. The second I declined. By the third call, she began sending messages complaining that I was being immature. She demanded that I stop, making everything worse by running away. Apparently, disappearing to avoid my cheating fiancé counted as running away now. I told her I didn't want to see her. She took that as an invitation to show up in person. She arrived with the intensity of someone who believed a dramatic entrance automatically solved everything. She hammered on the door, insisting she wouldn't leave until we cleared the air. I wasn't going to open it, but the repeated knocking echoed through the hallway like a fire alarm. She wasn't crying. She wasn't apologizing. Her voice was sharp, angry, and impatient, like I had interrupted her holiday plans by walking in on her affair. I stepped into the doorway but didn't let her inside. Her expression shifted immediately when she saw that I wasn't shaken or emotional. She accused me of embarrassing her. She said I had humiliated her by leaving the house after what she described as a misunderstanding. According to her, sleeping with someone else wasn't betrayal. It was exploring connection. She kept repeating that phrase like it was something taught in a casual psychology class she never attended. I told her she needed to leave or I would call the building manager. She looked insulted by the idea of being treated like a stranger. She said she wouldn't leave until I listened. But I wasn't going to repeat the cycle. I closed the door. That ended round 1. But round 2 came fast. 30 minutes later, I received a call from my workplace. Lena had shown up there. Not in the parking lot. Not outside. In the lobby. She told the receptionist she needed to speak to me urgently. The receptionist, who already knew pieces of the story because we had spoken earlier, refused to let her through. Lena didn't like that. Her voice rose loud enough that people in the building texted me to ask if I was okay. Security escorted her out. She messaged me afterward saying she couldn't believe I let them treat her like some unstable person. She insisted she only wanted to talk. She didn't understand that her actions weren't gestures of love. They were weapons of control. I blocked her. That should have been the end of the day's chaos. It wasn't. 2 hours later came the knock that changed the direction of everything. It wasn't Lena this time. It was a woman around my age, wearing a winter coat that had seen better seasons. Her expression carried exhaustion that didn't belong to someone who simply had a rough week. It was the kind of exhaustion that hinted at years of disappointment. She asked if I was the one who lived with Lena. When I confirmed it, she introduced herself as Amanda, the wife of the man I found with Lena in front of the fireplace. That detail hit me with the force of a slap I didn't see coming. Not girlfriend, not ex-partner. Wife. She apologized for showing up unannounced, but she said she had spent the morning trying to convince herself not to come. She failed. She needed answers. She needed to know how long her husband had been seeing my fiancé, because she had only discovered the truth after following his location data on a shared device. She told me she confronted him that morning, and he admitted the affair started long before Christmas. Then she showed me the messages. I didn't want details, but I needed to see them. They weren't explicit. They were worse. Lena made promises. Real promises. She told this man they were going to live together after the holidays. She described my house as if it were already theirs. She told him she wanted to get away from boring, predictable stability and start something more exciting. She sent photos of our living room and called it their future space. She joked about training me to accept their arrangement until she was ready to leave completely. That phrase tore something final in me. Training me. Like I was a dependent pet she needed to phase out. But then Amanda delivered a bigger revelation. Lena had told the man that I was aware of their relationship. She told him I didn't mind as long as things stayed discreet. He believed her. He had no idea I was still engaged to her. He thought he was stepping into a relationship with someone who had already broken up but hadn't officially moved out yet. He thought the secrecy was temporary. He thought I was somewhere in the background, indifferent or uninvolved. Amanda told me he cried when he realized she had lied to both of us. That didn't win sympathy from me, but it did rearrange the picture. Lena wasn't just betraying me. She was building a web of narratives tailored to each person, none of which aligned with the others. Before leaving, Amanda said something I wouldn't forget. She said her husband confessed one final detail. Lena had been pushing him to get her pregnant. She told him she wanted a child with someone spontaneous and exciting. She promised him they would raise the baby together and that I would handle the boring financial parts until things stabilized. That sentence worked like a pulse of heat under my ribs. It wasn't rage. It was disbelief so dense that it numbed my limbs. I thanked Amanda for telling me. She apologized again and walked away slowly, the weight of the truth hanging between us like fog. When I closed the door, I leaned against it, letting the silence settle. The morning of the affair had been a shock. Everything after was a structural failure of trust one didn't know existed. Lena hadn't simply cheated. She had mapped out long-term plans with a man she barely knew while using my stability as a foundation for those fantasies. Within minutes of Amanda leaving, Lena began calling again from different numbers. She must have sensed something shifting. She must have known her narratives were collapsing in places she couldn't control. I didn't answer. I let the silence grow. But silence has weight, and hers was only getting heavier. I didn't yet realize that part 3 of the disaster wasn't the end of the storm. It was only the moment before everything would blow open at once. The workplace fallout, her parents confronting me, and Derek abandoning her in a way that would rip the floor out from under her. The tempo was rising. The collapse was coming. And Christmas was only the prologue. The day after Amanda visited, I woke up to a feeling that something in the air had shifted. Not in a poetic, intuitive way, in a practical one. My phone was vibrating nonstop. I had missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize, 2 from Lena's mother, 1 from her father, and 6 messages from people I barely knew. I ignored everything at first. I showered, made coffee, and sat down on the edge of the Airbnb bed like someone waiting for a storm to reach its full shape before trying to understand it. The storm didn't wait. It crashed down all at once. The first clear sign came from Lena's mother. Her voicemail started with anger, not worry. She demanded to know why I had humiliated her daughter at Christmas and why I had left without explanation. She said Lena told her I had snapped, destroyed her gift, and vanished, leaving her to cry alone in the middle of a holiday. It was astonishing how quickly Lena constructed entire emotional landscapes that had nothing to do with reality. I had walked in on her affair, yet somehow she had framed it as my emotional abuse. That wasn't just manipulation, it was narrative manufacturing at a professional level. By the time I finished that voicemail, Lena's father had left one of his own. His tone was sharper. He demanded an apology. He said I owed his daughter respect. He said she had told him I threatened her. Threatened her. The same woman who smirked while half-naked with another man in front of our fireplace now claimed I had endangered her well-being. I didn't call them back immediately because they deserved the truth in a form that couldn't be twisted. I would send the proof later, the messages, the timeline, the statements from neighbors, and, eventually, the details Amanda provided. I wasn't going to argue verbally with people who had already accepted a false version of events. But I didn't get to choose the timing. The timing chose itself. By noon, the second wave hit. Lena had been fired. The news came from an unexpected source, one of her coworkers, someone who had never spoken to me directly before. She messaged me because the workplace had erupted into chaos that morning. According to her, someone, later revealed to be Amanda in a moment of furious clarity, had sent a long email to multiple company managers with screenshots of Lena's conversations, including the ones where she used office time and company accounts to buy personal gifts for Derek, gifts he had bragged about to friends. The coworker told me the office had held an emergency meeting. The managers confronted Lena. She tried to talk her way out of it by claiming the messages were fabricated. They weren't. Amanda had attached metadata. She had been prepared. Within an hour, Lena was terminated. Not gently. Security escorted her out. Derek, who also worked at the same company, was suspended pending review. But the part that delivered the biggest twist came next. Derek didn't defend her. He didn't claim innocence. He didn't support her version of events. He blamed everything on her. He told HR he had been manipulated into believing she was single and that she pressured him into continuing the relationship. He claimed she used him emotionally. He claimed she used him professionally. He threw her under the bus so quickly and completely that the bus didn't even slow down. That betrayal shocked even me. Not because I felt sorry for her, but because it revealed how little loyalty existed between them. They weren't a pair of lovers against the world. They were 2 opportunists sharing temporary fantasy until consequences forced them to choose themselves over each other. The coworker told me Lena broke down in the lobby, not from guilt, but from fear of losing her lifestyle. She had relied heavily on her job's holiday bonuses and the credit approvals tied to her employment. Losing that job meant losing financial oxygen. As the news spread through the company, I began receiving messages from people who had once believed Lena's stories about me. They apologized. They admitted she had told them for months that I was cold, distant, controlling, or uninterested. She had portrayed me as someone she tolerated, not someone she loved. That narrative had softened the ground for her affair by making it appear she wasn't truly connected to anyone. Now that narrative had crumbled, and people were scrambling to separate themselves from her lies. By mid-afternoon, Lena herself finally found a number of mine I hadn't blocked. She called repeatedly. I ignored her until she finally sent a message saying she had something important to tell me. Something I wouldn't want to hear from anyone else. At first, I assumed it was another manipulative tactic. It wasn't. When I finally answered, her voice wasn't angry. It was ragged. She said Derek had abandoned her. He had left her outside the office after HR suspended him. He didn't even offer her a ride home. He walked away as if they had never been involved. She tried to talk about redemption, reconciliation, repairing the relationship, but her words stumbled over themselves. She didn't apologize. She didn't take responsibility. She didn't ask how I was. She focused entirely on what her life was becoming. She said she needed my help. She said I couldn't just leave her to fall apart. I told her calmly that she had built the collapse she was experiencing. I wasn't punishing her. Reality was. She tried shifting tactics immediately. She threatened to contact more of my family and tell them things I knew were lies. I told her I had already prepared the truth for them. She lost her leverage in real time. She tried another angle. Tears, regret, pleading. But even her crying fell off, like she was disappointed in her strategy rather than heartbroken by her actions. When she realized I wasn't budging, she hung up abruptly. Within an hour, her parents reached out again, but this time their tone had changed. They had spoken to coworkers. They had seen some of the messages. They had watched the narrative unravel. They apologized, quietly and without excuses. They said they didn't know what had been happening. They sounded embarrassed. They sounded defeated. Later that evening, the final layer fell. Amanda updated me. After she confronted her husband, he moved out temporarily. Their marriage was fractured, but she had decided to separate until she had clarity. What she hadn't told me earlier was that Lena had approached her husband months ago pretending to be someone trapped in an unhappy engagement. She had told him he was the bright spot in her life. She had told him she needed him to help her escape the boring cage she lived in. Amanda said hearing those words come from him broke something in her permanently. When she finished talking, she wished me honest healing. There wasn't friendliness in her tone. There wasn't hostility, just recognition. We had both been rewritten by the same woman into parts that suited her imagination. The final consequence arrived 2 days later. Lena moved out of the house. Or rather, she collected her belongings and relocated to her cousin's cramped spare room. She couldn't afford rent anymore, and her credit card bills had started arriving. Holiday purchases she had hidden now demanded payment. Her social circle shrank quickly. Friends avoided her. Coworkers cut ties. Even Derek's friends, who had once welcomed her into bars and parties, turned against her when the truth emerged. Meanwhile, I returned to the house only long enough to remove anything that belonged to me. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt steady. The kind of steady that comes after a storm when you realize the structure of your life is still standing, even if the decor has been ripped away. When I walked past the fireplace one last time, I saw a faint mark on the brick where the box had burned. That small scorch mark was the end of something I should have ended long before Christmas. I left the house without looking back. And in that moment, I understood something simple. Lena wanted chaos, attention, and drama so badly that she built her world out of them. I walked away. She stayed inside what she built. Everything that happened afterward, the job loss, the financial collapse, the social fallout, wasn't revenge. She created the height. She created the drop. Reality simply connected the two.